Hi everybody, I decided to go ahead and make an appointment with a cardiologist. My PCP was pushing for it. He's concerned about doing the carnivore and the saturated fats, as well as my previous lipid panels were elevated. So I said, heck, why not? What's the worst that's going to happen? They tell me everything looks fine. The biggest reason I want to do this is because I want to have the tests to show how I've progressed, and also I want to be able to point to these doctors. You say my cholesterol's high, but it's not causing problems, so let's take a deeper look into this, versus just using these superficial HDL and LDL panels. I decided to kind of dig down and look at the research myself. There are a lot of carnivores who say don't worry about LDL, but I want to see it for myself and not just believe what's being said. I found an excellent video by Dr. Ekberg. I'll have it linked down below. He goes way more in depth than I do. It's excellent. I suggest watching it. I've listed some of the causes of these lipid imbalances. The first four are directly related to what we eat. The last three we'll go into a little more in depth for them to make more sense. Initially, when I went to see my PCP, they always do a lipid panel test. It always comes back high. It has for, the longest time I can remember, and they always want to scare me to get it down. The thing is, come to find out, these standard HDL, LDL panels, they aren't actually measuring the number of lipoproteins, which is what LDL and HDL are. They're measuring the cholesterol that they're carrying. Dr. Ekberg used a good example of the LDL cholesterol is like the passengers in the car, and the LDL is like the vehicle itself. So the big question is, why does it matter? And the answer isn't extremely simple, but the best way to look at it is a very gross overview of the actual situation. It doesn't tell you very much. To start to answer that, we'll kind of look back to the causes of the initial imbalances. First is glucose and insulin. With high amounts of glucose, that means you're taking a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of sugar. That glucose is then converted into glycogen within the liver. When the liver and the muscle reserves are full, then it converts it into triglycerides. And here I always thought triglycerides really only had to do with fat, not glucose getting turned into glycogen, getting turned into triglycerides. To me, this is really eye-opening. This is why you have people who are overweight, diabetic, and they have such high triglycerides. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I feel like the health community has always pushed that high triglycerides were because you were eating too fatty of things. But it turns out it can go both ways, having way too much fat and then having also way too much glucose carbs. This is a very simplistic view, but looking at this one thing, no wonder the human population has gotten so overweight, obese, and unhealthy. Our foods are packed full of carbohydrates, sugars, and fats rolled into single types of food. This increase in glucose leads to insulin resistance. The best way I can explain it is, imagine having a row of houses and each house is a cell, and then all of a sudden the houses get bombarded with solicitors and they're trying to sell stuff. Well, then people start putting up no solicitation signs. Nobody wants the solicitors, they're tired of getting them, and that's what happens with insulin. We bombard our cells with so much glucose and so much insulin, because insulin is what carries glucose in the blood, that the cells are like, they hang the signs up, no more, no entry, I cannot accept anymore, I'm already too full. The A1C just shows a kind of rough 3-month snapshot of your average blood sugar levels. We kind of already touched on triglycerides being converted from sugar and carbs through glycogen into triglycerides, but things like the fats we ingest, they're usually already in a fatty acid form, so they go directly from the gut into the fat cells when we have excess, but also protein. Protein can go into the liver and it's either repurposed as glucose or as into fatty acids. And just to tie that up, easy way to sum it up is excess calories are converted into fatty acids, which are triglycerides. Now, obviously, there's caveats to this, but just kind of at a high-level overview, it's a good way of thinking about it. So we addressed the 4 initial causes, and we'll move on to the next 3. So HDL has always been touted as the good cholesterol. And what does it actually do? So HDL, high-density lipoprotein, is almost like a garbage man for collecting fat and cholesterols in our body. They pick them up and they take them back to the liver. The liver then can repurpose them and pack them back into like other lipoproteins, or it can help point them to the direction of being excreted. A lot of physicians will say you need to increase your HDL. It's really important to decrease your, risk of cardiac events and things like that. However, after doing some digging, it turns out there's actually been a few studies that showed increasing HDL does not decrease the risk of a cardiac event happening. A reason that physicians continue to push increasing your HDL is because a majority of people that end up having cardiac events have lower HDL. And just because something's present doesn't mean it's actually causing it or not causing it to happen. Correlation does not equal causation. All right, so I've talked about HDL. Let's move on to VLDL. And what the heck is that? It stands for very low density lipoprotein. This lipoprotein carries the fatty acids from the liver into the cells and tissues so we can use the energy. This process happens within the liver. The liver picks up an LDL lipoprotein, it stuffs cholesterol and triglycerides, and then converts it into a VLDL. Okay, so we've covered the causes of lipid imbalances, but what about the causes of some cardiovascular issues? Things like chronic inflammation, autoimmune diseases, viruses, various things can cause that. Insulin resistance would be someone like a diabetic where they have bombarded their system with too much glucose. And oxidative stress, that would be things like being obese, having diabetes, smoking, alcohol consumption, medications, pollution, things that cause stressors on the body. Okay, so now we know some of the causes of lipid imbalances and some causes for cardiovascular issues. So how does this affect things like the LDL in our body? Well, we know the liver takes and packages the triglycerides, fatty acids, cholesterol into the LDL and then puts out VLDL. Once the VLDL is out of the liver, it goes and tries to find cells that'll accept it to deposit its content. Once the contents have been deposited, it reverts back into an LDL. This is a cyclical pattern that it goes LDL, VLDL, LDL, VLDL, and it just continues repeatedly in our body. Problems start happening though when you get lipid imbalances and issues with the overall body. Things we've already seen before are like oxidative stress, chronic inflammation. Something new is glycation. This happens when sugar is attached to proteins or lipids. Some of the issues that arise is insulin-resistant cells refuse to take any more energy, the triglycerides, from the VLDL. That means it has nowhere to deposit the triglycerides it's holding and just freely floats in our bloodstream. This in turn means when the VLDL is measured, we can see it as a marker of the severity of insulin resistance someone has. Some additional issues are if the LDL becomes damaged because of oxidation or glycation, the LDL shrinks, and having small particles like that in the blood vessels is not a good thing. These small particles then can get through the first layer within the arteries, causing the start of atherosclerosis. Not only is that an issue, but the liver is also not able to pick up these damaged LDL particles, so they just continuously build up. With all this knowledge, it kind of empowered me to figure out exactly what tests I want to ask the cardiologist for. First, I want to do an NMR lipoprofile that'll tell me what my VLDL is and my particle sizes are. The cardiac calcium score will tell me if there is any atherosclerosis going on. Knowing what I know now, I feel even more determined to stay on the carnivore path and not stress out about my LDL cholesterol levels. This being said, guys, we all know I'm not a physician. I'm not making any health recommendations. This is just the research I found. I'll link all the research studies below for you guys to view if you want to view. I truly hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I appreciate if you listened this far to my talking. I truly appreciate you and want to say thank you, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.